Welcome back to Origami Snowman. I'm going to do a real short video. I'm going to talk about writers who reference their work in other novels. Or, just talking about doing that. Because I love it. I like when it's subtle, but also you're like, are they referencing something else? For example, in James and the Giant Peach, early on in the book, Roald Dahl describes the peach rolling across the English countryside like completely out of control, smashing through fences, blasting through barns. At one point, it crashes through a big city and smashes through the wall of a chocolate factory and then out the other side, and a river of chocolate flows out into the streets, and the children wade out into it and just scoop the chocolate into their mouths. This is obviously a reference to Wonka's factory, right? And as a kid, I thought like I was in on some massive secret because I knew both of these books very well. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James and the Giant Peach. And I loved that. It made me feel like I held some kind of key, or like I was somehow like a more informed reader than other people. And I wanted to like point out to everybody, like, do you realize you're missing out? Do you see what he's done here? He's a genius. It's so incredible. Like, you got to you know what I mean? I of course, nobody that I knew actually cared. That remains the case today. However, and I'm sure there are many other examples of Roald Dahl doing this in his work, but that was one that as a kid I spotted, and ever since I have just loved the idea of a writer referencing his other work. In fact, now that I'm talking about it, my favorite Roald Dahl book, which I've mentioned before, is Danny, the Champion of the World. In that book, Danny's father tells him a bedtime story about the big friendly giant, the BFG. And it goes on, this tale goes on for many, many nights, and, it's very fantastic and very, exciting and everything. Well, Roald Dahl ended up writing that book, The Big Friendly Giant. It's quite a bit different from the story that Danny's father tells him, but it's still pretty cool that, he took the small ember from another one of his books and decided, you know what, let's give that one a little more attention. I love that as well. Two of my other favorite writers who do this, Stephen King and Brandon Sanderson, they do it like unapologetically, and they do it in such a way that you can't miss what they're doing. Even if you've never read any of their other work, you can't possibly miss what they're doing. In fact, it's this very thing that got me really hooked on Stephen King. In the book Insomnia, which may have been like the third Stephen King book I've ever read, which is odd because it's not one of his better known books. It is terrific and I highly recommend it. But there is a moment where I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a plot resolution, which, yay, great. We like when plots get resolved, but there is a plot resolution that the result of which Stephen King describes a character in another world sleeping fitfully, but when this moment happens, he rolls over and sleeps soundly. Like, he doesn't know that something very important has happened in another world, but he sleeps on. And this is Roland Deschain, the gunslinger from The Dark Tower. In fact, a character in that book, Insomnia, acknowledges Roland and acknowledges the Crimson King, who is sort of one of the main antagonists of The Dark Tower. He's just mentions them. And I'm, again, not going to spoil anything, but what he says, like, I knew enough to know that there was this book, The Gunslinger, and I kind of understood, like, I was vaguely aware that there was this whole thing going on that I just didn't really know a lot about. It was literally like I was aware of a series, and I may have known that there was a character named Roland in the series. However, when this character, who's not even a main character in the book, mentions Roland, I got chills. And for for no reason other than, oh, Stephen King is referencing his other works. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but most of his books are part of the Dark Tower series in some way or another. Just there's there is a scene in It where they talk about seeing the vastness of the universe, and this great turtle is part of all of it, and all this. That's one of the guardians that they reference in the Dark Tower that they're trying to save, trying to protect, so that the tower can remain standing and all worlds can go on existing. Long story, and don't worry, that's not a spoiler at all, because it's one grain of sand on the whole beach. But this is something that he does, from The Stand to Salem's Lot, and just everything. So many different characters. The Eyes of the Dragon, just all these different books, they all tie in to the Dark Tower. One that people didn't seem to enjoy too much, From a Buick 8. I loved that book. It was such a book that he wrote for himself, and I get it. I understand. You have these ideas, you have these thoughts for stories, and you think, that really is only appealing to me. I'm not going to waste my time writing it. But Stephen King's the kind of writer who has seen so much success that he can write whatever he wants. Whoops, I meant to only play up to hole 50. But I haven't even barely scratched the surface of what I want to talk about, so I'll just keep playing. He's such a successful writer that he could write gibberish, and people would buy it and try to decode it. It would still be a bestseller, for that reason. Either it's a secret code or he's lost his mind. Either way, it's of interest. And I feel like From a Buick 8 was a story he had in the back of his mind, and he thought, is this of interest to the general public? Turns out it's one of his least loved books, but I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was so out there. It was so, like, there are no answers in the end, and I think that's what people like. They don't like. They don't like answers, or they don't like unanswered questions. But here's the thing. I think I've talked about this before. I think Stephen King isn't great at answering those questions, and I think one thing he did very right with this book was he just left some answers or questions unanswered, and I really liked that. It might be why I liked it so much. So much of his bibliography references itself, and it's terrific. It's really deep. It's like a whole universe. It's like the expanded Stephen King universe. If you've never read Stephen King, I will be honest. I grew up with kind of a prejudice against Stephen King. I don't know why. I think because of the conservative community that I grew up in, the evangelical background, I just assumed that anything with blood and fangs was trashy, until I think I read Cujo, and I was like really impressed with how authentic the writing felt, and with how bold he was to do what he did in that book, which I'm not going to spoil that, but I was surprised. I was impressed. And I was a teenager when I read that. So up to that point, most of the books I'd read were all pretty vanilla, you know. But the second Stephen King book I ever read was The Shining. And if you've ever read The Shining, it is a masterpiece. Like it is a very scary book. I was 19 years old reading that book, and I was scooting to the center of my bed, making sure that nothing could reach over and get me. Like, and I any time I'm reading a book and it generate like my fictional emotions become real. I love that. My hat goes off to you, sir. Good job. You fabricated an emotional response. I'm impressed. So once I really got into Stephen King, I was, you know, very, oh my goodness, I was very impressed to see how well and seamlessly he had joined all of his tales, you know. So anyway, if you've never read Stephen King, definitely give it a shot, but be aware that, you know, you're not going to get to the end of the thread. It's all connected. You'll just keep reading Stephen King, but no worries. There's plenty to be read. And then the other writer I was going to talk about was Brandon Sanderson. Now, Stephen King, his references, while not subtle, are definitely more subtle than Brandy Sandy's. Brandon Sanderson, he'll straight up reference other worlds and other characters, and so his whole little universe, it's called the Cosmere, and he calls it that in his books. Characters refer to it as the Cosmere. He will reference, allomancy in a book where the characters do not know what allomancy is and do not have access to that skill. He will reference shards and he will reference spren in books where, like, the people live on planets where they don't have those things. And I would say it's pretentious, but he knows that if you're reading Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, that's probably not your first Brandon Sanderson book. And if it is, it's the type of book where it's not, I don't know how to, so, okay, if you ever read a Kurt Vonnegut novel, he's very funny. He's very, very funny. But if you read a Kurt Vonnegut short story, the humor takes a back seat. He doesn't have a whole lot of time to inject his own voice. It's a little more just straight narrative, He's trying to make a single point, okay? Brandon Sanderson does quite the opposite. In Stormlight Archive, there's just acres of pages about trauma and about distress and about war. And then maybe you'll get a page or two where the dialogue is charming and funny, where the two characters are bantering, okay? Now, in his shorter novels, like Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, it's a lot of banter. He goes real heavy on the silly. In the Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving in Medieval England, it was very silly, a lot of silly, and so he knows, like, if you're reading one of those secret project books, the shorter novels, you're not getting the full taste of Brandon Sanderson, and so he just goes a little more blunt, and he's like, look, there are a lot of facets to this world, and he almost treats those books like a just an introductory pamphlet, you know. Like, if you're staying at this hotel, just know that we have many other services at some of our other hotels that you'll find over across the country. It's got a feeling of like a Holiday Inn saying, you know, you might not have had a water slide at this hotel, but some of our other hotels have lovely water parks, you know, as part of the rental package for your room. And so he's sort of sending, you know, it's like he's playing commercials in the middle of his book for his other books. Doesn't bother me one little bit. In fact, I kind of loved it because it helped plug me in, and it made me feel, again, very much like that reference to Wonka's factory in James and the Giant Peach, like I was a more informed reader, you know, like I was smart enough to see what they were doing. And so I love that kind of stuff. In fact, in so my first novel that I wrote was called The Blood Pines, and the Blood Pines, that references a specific kind of tree. And if, for lack of a better title, I just went with Blood Pines. I that's, you know, it seemed like a relevant title. Not pretentious, not, it fits. I think it's very nice. But in my second novels, my second, third, fourth novels, it's a series, which, again, not crazy about. It's called Whithersoever. And I think in the second one of the characters, she grew up as like, her people are foresters. They love the trees. In fact, her name is Silva, which is derived from the word Sylvan, you know, having to do with trees. And so there's a moment where I'm describing different trees, and, you know, there's pines, and there's, you know, sycamores, and there's blood pines, and, you know, and I just dropped in blood pine into, you know, just a nice fun little reference, you know. And then I went a little heavy-handed and started naming characters after people, like genuinely, like, boom, named a character after my mother, and that character had a cat that I named after my stepfather. So, you know, yeah, I was phoning that one in. That's going to get a full rewrite here one of these days, sooner rather than later, I hope. But I just really love I love when writers do that, when they just make these fun little references to characters, you know. And I know there are so many authors who do this, but sitting here in my chair, I can't call them up, you know. Agatha Christie did that sort of thing, you know. She was a big fan of, you know, like, all of her characters lived in the same world, you know. Why wouldn't they encounter each other from time to time? It's just a neat thing. It makes you feel like, hey, I did the work, and now this is the payoff. I definitely enjoy it. If you have any other examples, please share them with me, so I, you know, pretend like I'm having a conversation. Anyway, I think maybe, should I quit here or should I keep going? I think I'm gonna quit here. I'm at the end of the conversation. We're just gonna call it. This is a weird place to stop, but we're gonna call it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my thoughts. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.